The cabin was still burning when the first snow began to fall. Thick black smoke curled into the gray December sky above Silver Creek, Montana, twisting like the breath of some dying beast. The flames had already consumed the roof, eaten through the walls, left nothing but a skeleton of charred timber standing against the white wilderness. If you stood close enough, you could still hear the crackling, the hiss of melting snow meeting fire, the groan of wood surrendering to ash. But no one stood close. The people of Silver Creek had learned long ago not to ask questions about fires in the night. Fires were how problems disappeared in this territory. Fires were how debts got settled. Fires were the language of men who lived outside the law, and the law was 300 miles away in Helena. Too far to matter, too far to care. 3 days earlier, the cabin had still been whole. 3 days earlier, a girl named Mei Zhang had still believed she might survive the winter. The Chinese labor camp sat 2 miles north of Silver Creek, a festering wound on the mountainside where men lived in canvas tents and worked until their bodies broke. The Ma family owned the camp the way a man owns cattle, and the laborers were livestock, nothing more. They dug into the frozen earth with picks and shovels, searching for gold that would never belong to them, gold that bought them nothing but another day of breathing. May had lived in that camp for 6 months. She lived in a tent with 4 other women, all of them widows or daughters of dead miners, all of them trapped in the same slow-grinding machinery of debt. The Ma family said they owed money for passage to America, for food, for shelter, for the privilege of staying alive. The debt never shrank. It only grew, feeding on itself like rot, spreading through timber. May had stopped believing the debt was real. She had started believing something else instead. She had started believing that her younger brother had died for a reason. His name was Xiaolong, Little Dragon. He had been 16 years old when Ma Feng put a bullet in his head. It happened on a Tuesday night in November. May remembered because Tuesdays were when they distributed the rice rations, and Xiaolong had been smiling that day. He had whispered to her in the food line, his voice bright with conspiracy, his eyes dancing with the kind of dangerous hope that got people killed on the frontier. "I found it, Jia. I found the proof." She had told him to be quiet, told him to stop looking for trouble, told him that their father's death was an accident, that digging into the past would only bury them both. But Xiaolong had never listened. He had spent months piecing together the truth, sneaking into Ma Feng's office at night, reading documents he could barely understand, copying maps by candlelight. And he had found it, the original land claim. The paperwork that proved their father Chen Wei had discovered the richest vein of gold in Montana territory. The paperwork that proved Ma Feng had murdered him to steal it. The jade vein, they called it. A deposit so pure that the ore glittered green in the right light. Worth a fortune, worth killing for, worth dying for. Xiaolong had stolen the map. He had folded it small, hidden it inside his boot, and run to find May. His hands had been shaking when he pressed the paper into her palm. "Hide this. Don't tell anyone. If something happens to me, take it and run." Something had happened. Ma Feng's men had found Xiaolong 3 hours later. They dragged him to the center of camp, made everyone watch. Ma Feng himself had done the interrogation. He was a small man, thin and sharp like a blade, with eyes that held no light. He asked questions in a voice that never rose above a whisper. "Where is the map?" Xiaolong had spit blood at his feet. Ma Feng had smiled. Then he drew his pistol, placed it against the boy's temple, and painted the snow red. May had stood in the crowd, the map burning like a coal against her skin, where she had hidden it beneath her shirt. She had not moved, had not screamed, had not let her face show anything but the empty shock every other witness wore. Because the moment she showed she knew anything, the moment she revealed the map's location, she would join her brother in the frozen ground. That night, she had run. She took nothing but the clothes on her back, a stolen knife, and the map that had cost her brother his life. She ran through the darkness, through the pine forest, her breath tearing at her lungs, her hands leaving bloody prints on the tree bark where she grabbed for balance. Behind her, she heard dogs, heard men shouting, heard the crack of gunfire splitting the winter silence. A bullet had grazed her left hand, laid the skin open to the bone, but she had kept running. By the time she reached Silver Creek, dawn was breaking pale and cold over the mountains. The town was waking, smoke rising from chimneys. the smell of frying bacon mixing with the stench of horse manure and unwashed humanity. May stumbled down the main street, her hand wrapped in a strip torn from her undershirt, the fabric already soaked red. She needed to disappear. Ma Feng would come looking, would send his men into every saloon, every boarding house, every shadowed corner of this town until they found her. She had maybe hours, maybe less. That was when she saw him. The man in the red flannel shirt arguing with a bartender outside the Lucky Nugget saloon. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with a dark beard that covered half his face and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He moved like violence held on a leash, all coiled tension and barely restrained fury. The bartender, a fat man with sweat stains darkening his collar, was shaking his head. "I told you, Crane, the bank won't extend your loan without proof of stability. You're a single man living alone on a failing ranch. They want collateral. They want family. They want to know you're not going to drink yourself to death and leave them with worthless land." The man in red, this Crane, slammed his fist against the hitching post. A horse nearby, startled, stamped its hooves. "I don't have family," Crane growled. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over iron. "I have land, I have timber, that should be enough. It's not." The bartender shrugged, already turning away. "Get yourself a wife, Tobias. Then maybe the bank will talk to you." Tobias Crane stood there, swaying slightly. Drunk, May realized, or close to it. He stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else, like he was trying to remember what they were for. And May made a decision. It was insane, desperate, but desperation was all she had left. She walked up to him, her wounded hand throbbing with every heartbeat, her vision swimming at the edges. She stopped 3 feet away and spoke in English the words, careful and precise. "I need to disappear. You need a wife. 1 winter. Then I am gone." Tobias Crane turned his head slowly. His eyes were blue cold as glacial ice, and they focused on her with the kind of attention a predator gives to prey. He looked at her bloody hand, at her torn clothes, at the exhaustion carved into her face. "You, running from the law." His words slurred slightly. "Worse," May said. He studied her for a long moment. Then without another word he turned and walked toward the land office at the end of the street. May followed. The clerk was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He looked between them, his eyes widening. "You want to register a marriage, not a marriage," Tobias said, his voice flat. "A claim. She's my housekeeper. I need documentation for the bank. She needs work. Simple transaction." The clerk licked his lips. "This is irregular. Everything on this mountain is irregular." Tobias slapped a silver dollar on the desk. "Write up a contract, employment, witnessed and dated. I don't care what you call it," the clerk wrote. 20 minutes later, Mei Jiang had a piece of paper that said she belonged to Tobias Crane's household. It was not freedom, but it was a door, and she stepped through it. They left Silver Creek that afternoon. Tobias had a horse, a big black stallion with mean eyes and a tendency to bite. He swung into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He did not offer to help May up. She climbed on behind him, gripping the edge of the saddle, her wounded hand screaming protest. He did not speak as they rode. The trail climbed steadily into the foothills, following a frozen creek bed through dense stands of pine and aspen. The trees were skeletal, their branches heavy with snow, and the silence was absolute. Not even birds sang. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the fragile machinery keeping you alive in a world that wanted you dead. They rode for 3 hours. May's legs went numb. Her hand stopped hurting, which was worse than the pain because it meant the cold was winning. She pressed her face against Tobias's back, feeling the heat of him through the wool shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing. He smelled like tobacco and pine sap, and something darker, something like old blood. She did not trust him, but she was too tired to be afraid. When they finally stopped, twilight had turned the world purple and gray. They were in a small clearing sheltered on 3 sides by rock face with a view down the valley that stretched for miles. And there, half hidden by snow and shadow, was a cabin. It was not abandoned. It was something worse. It was haunted. May felt it the moment Tobias helped her down from the horse. The cabin was solid, well built, with a stone chimney and glass windows that caught the dying light. But there was something wrong about it. Something in the way it sat in the clearing, too still, too silent, like a held breath. Tobias did not look at it. He tended to his horse first, unsaddling the animal with methodical care, checking its hooves, brushing ice from its mane. Only when the horse was settled in a rough lean-to did he turn toward the cabin. He unlocked the door. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Furniture sat exactly where it had been, left a book open on the table, a shawl hanging on a peg by the fireplace. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. "My wife's house," Tobias said. His voice was empty. "Don't touch her things." He pointed to a door at the back of the room. "That room stays locked. Understand?" May nodded. Tobias moved through the cabin like a ghost himself, lighting the fire in the hearth, melting snow for water, pulling strips of dried venison from a cupboard. He worked in silence, his movements efficient, and May watched him from the corner where she had curled up trying to make herself small. She noticed things: the way his hands shook slightly when he struck the match for the fire, the way he avoided looking at the shawl on the peg, the way he poured whiskey into his coffee and drank it in 3 long swallows. This was a man carrying something heavy. They ate in silence. The venison was tough, the coffee bitter. May forced herself to chew, to swallow, to keep the food down, even though her stomach wanted to reject it. She needed strength, needed to stay alive long enough to figure out her next move. After the meal, Tobias stood and pointed to a pile of furs in the corner. "You sleep there. I'll take the floor by the fire." "Why?" The question escaped before May could stop it. Tobias looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the saloon. His eyes were bloodshot, his face lined with exhaustion. "Because I'm not the kind of man who hurts women. Not anymore." He turned away, rolled out a bedroll near the hearth, and lay down with his back to her. May sat in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside, listening to the fire crackle, listening to the silence inside this cabin that felt like a tomb. Her hand throbbed. Her body ached, but she could not sleep. She thought about Xiaolong. Thought about the way he used to sing when he worked old songs their mother had taught them. Thought about the brightness in his eyes when he told her about the map, the hope that had killed him. And before she could stop herself, she began to hum. It was a lullaby, simple, soft something their mother had sung to them when they were small, and the world had not yet shown its teeth. The melody filled the cabin, fragile as spun glass. Tobias did not move, but his breathing changed, slowed, deepened. For the first time in 2 years, Tobias Crane fell asleep without dreaming of his dead wife. The first week was a test of wills. Tobias woke before dawn each day and expected May to do the same. He did not ask. He simply handed her an axe, pointed at the woodpile, and walked away. She chopped wood until her shoulders screamed, hauled water from the creek until her back felt like it would snap, cooked meals over the fire using whatever he provided, mostly dried meat and hard biscuits that could break teeth. He did not thank her. He did not speak unless necessary, but he also did not hurt her, did not touch her, did not look at her with the hunger she had learned to recognize in men's eyes. He treated her like a piece of furniture, useful, temporary, easily forgotten. May preferred it that way. She worked, and while she worked, she watched him, learned his routines, the way he checked his guns every morning, cleaning them with obsessive care, the way he walked the perimeter of the clearing at dusk looking for tracks, the way he sat by the fire at night staring into the flames, his hand resting on the locked door of his dead wife's room. On the 3rd day, she discovered he could not read well. He had a book, a ledger for tracking ranch expenses, and he sat with it open, his finger tracing the words, his lips moving silently. She saw him pause, frown, skip a line, saw the frustration tighten his jaw. "That word is collateral," May said quietly. Tobias's head snapped up. "What?" "The word you are stuck on. It means something of value held as guarantee. How do you know that my father taught me English? He wanted us to understand the documents the mine owners made him sign." Tobias stared at her. Then he closed the book and stood up. "I don't need charity. It is not charity. It is trade. You teach me how to survive out here. I teach you to read better." He said nothing. But the next evening, when he sat with the ledger, he left it open on the table where she could see. On the 5th day, May set a snare and caught a rabbit. Tobias found her skinning it behind the cabin, her hands quick and sure despite the healing wound. He stopped, watched her work. "Where did you learn to do that, my brother?" "He taught me many things the men in camp did not think a woman should know." "Your brother," Tobias repeated. "The one you're running from, the one who died for me." She said it flatly without emotion and went back to skinning the rabbit. Tobias stood there for a long moment. Then he walked away without another word. That night they ate rabbit stew, and for the first time Tobias spoke more than 5 words in a row. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who would cry more, someone who would beg to go back to town." May looked at him across the fire. "I am done crying, and there is nothing for me in town. What about your family?" "My family is dead, my father, my brother. There is no one left, and yet someone is looking for you." May's hand tightened on her spoon. "How do you know?" "Because I used to hunt people for money. I know what running looks like." "And you?" "May Jiang are running from something that scares you more than I do." She met his eyes. "You do not scare me. I should." "Why?" "Because the last person who trusted me is dead." The silence stretched between them, heavy as iron. Finally May spoke. "Your wife." Tobias's face went blank. "Don't. I am not asking. I am only saying I understand. Guilt is a ghost. It follows you everywhere. You don't know anything about it. I know you keep her room locked. I know you drink to sleep. I know you blame yourself for something you probably could not prevent. That is what guilt does. It lies." Tobias stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "This conversation is over." He went outside into the freezing night, and May heard him chopping wood in the darkness, the axe falling again and again, the sound like a heartbeat, like rage, like grief, looking for a way out. She did not follow him, but she understood him a little better. On the 7th day, a man came to the cabin. May saw him first. She was hanging clothes to dry on a line Tobias had strung between 2 trees, and she caught the movement at the edge of the clearing. A rider approaching slowly, one hand raised in the universal gesture of peace. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran for the cabin. Tobias was inside, sharpening his hunting knife. He looked up when she burst through the door. "Someone is coming." He was on his feet in an instant, the knife in his belt, the rifle in his hands. He moved to the window, looked out, and his entire body went rigid. "Get inside. Stay quiet." "Who is it?" "Someone from before." The rider emerged into the clearing, and May got her first clear look at him. He was older than Tobias, maybe 40, with gray streaking his brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore a duster coat and a badge on his chest, though it looked unofficial, the kind of badge men pinned on themselves when they wanted to pretend at authority. He stopped his horse 20 feet from the cabin and called out, "Tobias Crane. Been a long-time old friend." Tobias did not lower the rifle. He stepped onto the porch, his posture radiating danger. "Wade, what are you doing on my mountain?" the man. Wade smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "Can't a man visit an old partner?" "Heard you got yourself a wife. Wanted to see if it was true. You heard wrong. Now turn around." Wade's eyes drifted past Tobias to the window where May stood half hidden by the curtain. His smile widened. "That's funny, because I see a woman in your cabin. And word around Silver Creek is you registered a housekeeper contract with a Chinese girl. Same day Ma Feng's men were searching the town for a runaway." The air went cold. Tobias's voice dropped to a growl. "Say what you came to say, Wade." Wade leaned forward in his saddle, all pretense of friendliness gone. "There's a bounty, Tobias. $500 for a Chinese girl, mid-20s, wounded left hand. Ma Feng says she stole something valuable. Says he wants her back alive, but he'll settle for proof of death. And you came to collect. I came to give you a warning, because we rode together once, and that should count for something. Turn her over, or someone else will come who won't knock politely." Tobias raised the rifle an inch. "Get off my land." Wade sighed. "Always were stubborn. Fine. I'll give you until spring. But when the snow melts, Tobias, I'm coming back. With or without you, I'm collecting that bounty." He turned his horse and rode back into the trees. Tobias stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he lowered the rifle and turned to face May. She was standing in the doorway now, her face pale but composed. "How much is the bounty?" Tobias asked. "I told you, 500. That's a lot of money, enough to save my ranch." May's hand moved to the knife she kept hidden in her belt. "If you turn me in, I will fight you." Tobias looked at her, really looked, saw the steel beneath the fear, the determination in her eyes. Then he did something she did not expect. He laughed. It was a bitter sound, sharp as broken glass. "You think I'd sell you? After everything, you need the money. I need a lot of things. Money's just one of them." He walked past her into the cabin, set the rifle against the wall. "But what I don't need is another ghost in this house. I do not understand. My wife killed herself because of what I was, a hunter, a man who traded lives for coin. I'm not going back to that. Not for 500, not for 5,000. Then what will you do?" Tobias sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I'm going to make us both some coffee, and then you're going to tell me the truth, all of it. Because Wade was right about one thing, someone will come. And when they do, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." May hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, she reached inside her shirt and pulled out the folded piece of paper she had carried since that terrible night. She set it on the table between them. "My brother died for this. It is a map to a gold vein. The jade vein, worth more than you can imagine. And the man who wants it back will kill everyone in this territory to get it." Tobias unfolded the map, his eyes scanning the markings, the topographical details, the X that marked the location. He looked up at May. "And you think you can stop him? I think I can make him pay, or die trying." Tobias was quiet for a long moment. Then he refolded the map and pushed it back across the table. "Keep it. It's yours. But if we're doing this, we're doing it smart. No heroics, no suicide runs. We plan, we prepare. And when spring comes and Wade returns, we make sure he finds exactly what we want him to find. What is that? A happy married couple with nothing to hide." May felt something shift in her chest. A small flame of hope, dangerous and fragile. "Why are you helping me?" Tobias stood and walked to the fireplace. He stared at the locked door of his wife's room. "Because she asked me to be a better man. And I failed her. But maybe I don't have to fail you." He turned back, and for the first time May saw something other than grief in his eyes. She saw purpose. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thick and soft, covering the tracks Wade had left, covering the blood and the fear and the memories. Inside the cabin, two people who had been running from their pasts sat down together and began to plan a future. Neither of them knew if they would survive it. But for the first time in a long time, both of them wanted to try. The map lay flat on the table between them, weighted at the corners by a coffee cup, a hunting knife, a candle stub, and the small smooth stone May carried in her pocket. The stone had belonged to Xiaolong. He had found it by the creek when he was 7 years old, told her it looked like a dragon's egg. She had laughed at him then. Now she carried it everywhere, a talisman against forgetting. Tobias leaned over the map, his finger tracing the lines her father had drawn in careful ink. Rivers, mountain ridges, the twisted path that led to the X, marking the jade vein. His eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. "Broken Ridge," he said quietly. "This is near Broken Ridge." May looked up. "You know it." Tobias straightened his jaw tight. "I tracked a man there once, 4 years ago, cattle rustler with a price on his head. He knew the terrain, thought he could hide in the high country. He was wrong. What happened to him, Rockslide? Buried him before I could bring him in." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but something flickered behind his eyes. "The land up there is unstable. Snowmelt undermines the slopes. One wrong step and the whole mountain comes down." May felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "My brother knew this." "Your brother was 16 and angry. Angry people don't think about rockslides. Do not call him foolish." The words came out sharper than she intended. Tobias looked at her, really looked, and she saw him reassess. Saw him recognize the grief barely held in check. "I didn't," he said. "I called him angry. There's a difference. Anger makes you brave, makes you do things you know might kill you because the alternative is worse." He moved away from the table, poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. He did not offer her any. After a week in the cabin, May had learned this meant he was thinking, wrestling with something he did not want to say. She waited. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin walls. January in Montana was a special kind of hell, the kind that made you understand why the old trappers went mad, why men shot themselves rather than face another week of white emptiness. But inside, the fire kept burning. The walls held. And slowly, carefully, two people were learning to exist in the same space without destroying each other. "Tell me about your father," Tobias said finally. May's hands tightened around her own cup. "Why?" "Because if we're going to use this map, I need to know who made it. Need to know if he knew what he was doing." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she began to speak. Chen Wei was a geologist before he was a miner. He studied in Guangzhou, learned to read the earth like other men read books. When he came to America, the mining companies saw a Chinese man and assumed he was just another laborer. But my father could look at a rock face and tell you what lay beneath. Could read the striations, the mineral content, the way water had carved through stone over centuries. Why did he come here for a better life? The same lie everyone tells themselves. Her voice carried a bitterness that made Tobias glance at her. She continued. He worked for the Ma family for 8 years. They paid him nothing, said he owed them for the boat passage, for the food, for breathing their air. But he kept working because he had my brother and me to feed. And at night he would take me outside and point at the stars and tell me that someday we would have our own claim. Someday we would find the vein that would buy our freedom. Did he find it? Yes. May's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He found it, and it killed him. She told him the rest. How Chen Wei had been exploring an abandoned section of the mountain, mapping it for his own records. How he had discovered the jade vein, a deposit so pure it glittered in lamplight. How he had quietly filed a legal claim under his own name, something almost no Chinese laborer dared to do. How Ma Feng had somehow learned about it. There was an accident at the mine 2 weeks later. A support beam collapsed. My father and 3 other men were crushed. The company said it was bad timber, bad luck, the will of heaven, but Xiaolong did not believe in accidents, so he investigated. For 2 years. He was patient, my brother. Learned to read, learned to move through camp like a shadow. He found the claim documents in Ma Feng's safe. Found the proof that Ma Feng had forged papers, made it look like he owned the jade vein. Found evidence that the beam collapse was sabotage, that Ma Feng had ordered it to eliminate witnesses. Tobias set down his coffee cup with careful precision. Your brother was braver than most grown men I've known. He was a child. He should have been playing, learning, living. Instead, he was trying to avenge our father. And you blame yourself for not stopping him. It was not a question. May looked at Tobias and saw in his eyes a recognition that went bone deep. He understood guilt, lived with it like a second skin. I should have made him stop, she said. Should have burned the map, forgotten. The claim survived. Instead, I told him to be careful, told him I was proud of him. And those were the last words I ever spoke to my brother. The silence that followed was profound. Tobias walked to the locked door, the one he never opened, the one that held his dead wife's things. He placed his palm flat against the wood. Her name was Sarah, he said. May said nothing, waited. She was a schoolteacher, came to Silver Creek to bring civilization to the wilderness, that's what she said. She had this idea that education could save people, that if she just taught them to read, to think they would stop killing each other over scraps of land and nuggets of gold. Was she right? No. Tobias laughed, but it was a hollow sound. She lasted 2 years before the territory broke her, but in those 2 years, she tried. God, she tried. He turned to face May, and she saw the rawness in his expression, the wound that had never healed. I was hunting bounties when I met her. Came into town with a dead man tied to my horse blood on my clothes, looking for whoever would pay me to drag corpses across the territory. She was outside the general store reading to a group of children. She looked at me like I was something foul, something that needed to be washed away. But you married her, eventually. I cleaned up, stopped bounty hunting for a while, worked as a ranch hand, convinced her I could be better, and for 3 years I was. We built this cabin together, planned to raise children. grow old watching the seasons change. What happened? Money ran out. Ranch work wasn't enough. And there was a bounty, a big one, $1,000 for an outlaw who had killed a marshal. I told Sarah it was one last job. Told her I would be back in a month with enough money to get us through the next 5 winters. May felt her chest tighten. You did not come back in a month. I came back in 3. Tracked that outlaw across 2 territories, through places God himself had abandoned. When I finally caught him, we were in the Bitterroot Mountains, and the snow was so deep you could barely move. I had to wait for the thaw to bring his body back. And when you returned, she was gone. Tobias's voice broke. He cleared his throat, forced the words out. Hanged herself from the beam in what is now the locked room. Left a letter. I burned it without reading it. Why? Because I was a coward. Because whatever she wrote, it would have been the truth, and I did not want to know how much I had failed her. May stood and crossed the room. She stopped in front of the locked door, placed her hand next to his on the wood. She must have loved you very much, May said softly, to hurt that much when you were gone. Tobias looked at her hand, small and scarred, next to his. That is the problem. She loved a man I was not, loved the version of me I pretended to be. And who are you now, I do not know. I have been hiding up here too long to find out. They stood like that for 3 full minutes, not speaking, not moving. Just 2 people carrying the weight of their dead, learning that sometimes the only thing you can do with grief is stand next to someone else who understands it. Finally, Tobias stepped back. His voice was rough when he spoke. We should sleep. Tomorrow I will teach you to use the rifle properly. If Wade comes back, you need to be able to defend yourself. May nodded, but before she turned away, she said, Thank you for telling me about Sarah. Tobias looked surprised. Why? Because now I know you understand what it means to carry ghosts, and I do not feel so alone. That night, for the 2nd time since his wife's death, Tobias Crane slept without nightmares. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for survival. May learned to handle the Winchester rifle, the weight of it against her shoulder, the kick when she fired. Tobias taught her to account for wind, for distance, for the way cold air makes bullets drop faster. He was patient in a way she had not expected, positioning her body with careful hands, his voice steady as he talked her through each shot. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze on the exhale, let the rifle do the work. She missed the first 20 targets, hit the 21st. By the end of the week, she could hit a pine cone at 50 yards. Afternoons were for work. They chopped wood together, hauled water-scraped ice from the roof before it could collapse the shingles. Tobias showed her how to read weather in the color of the sky, how to tell the difference between wolf tracks and coyote tracks in the snow. She showed him how to make the flour last longer by mixing it with ground acorns, a trick her mother had taught her during lean times. Evenings were for something else, something neither of them named. Tobias could read, but he struggled. Words turned themselves around in his head, letters rearranged themselves when he was tired. May had noticed it watching him with the ranch ledger, the way he would trace the same line 3 times before moving on. One night she simply started reading aloud. It was a book of poetry, one of Sarah's. She found it on the shelf, dusty and forgotten. Tobias tensed when she opened it, but he did not tell her to stop. The snow had begun long before dawn and still was falling, and still shall be falling. She read, her accent turning the words musical, the syllables unfamiliar to her tongue, but she pushed through. Tobias sat across the fire, whittling a piece of pine, his hands moving in rhythm to her voice. When she finished the poem, he said, "You read well," my father insisted. Said that in America, if you cannot read English, you do not exist. He was right. Will you try? May held the book toward him. Tobias hesitated. Then he set down his knife and took the book. He read slowly, halting his finger, following each line. May corrected gently when he stumbled, never mocking, always patient. By the end of the week, he could read a full page without stopping. By the end of the second week, something had shifted between them. It was the small things. The way Tobias poured her coffee in the morning without asking if she wanted it. The way May started mending his shirts without being told they needed fixing. The way they moved around each other in the small cabin, a dance of proximity and careful distance. But distance was becoming harder to maintain. One afternoon, Tobias came back from checking his trap lines to find May in the kitchen area attempting to make dumplings. She had improvised with what they had: flour and water and dried venison chopped fine, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. "What are you making dumplings? For Lunar New Year?" Tobias frowned. "That was 2 weeks ago." "I know. But I did not celebrate it. And I wanted to. Just once." She did not look at him, kept her eyes on her work, but he heard the longing in her voice, the homesickness, the grief for all the celebrations she would never have with her family again. "Can I help?" She glanced up, surprised. "You want to make dumplings? I want to try." She showed him how to roll the dough thin, how to place the filling, how to fold and pleat the edges. His first attempts looked like small disasters, lumpy and misshapen. The second batch was worse. By the fifth dumpling, May was laughing. It was the first time Tobias had heard her really laugh. Not a bitter sound, not a polite noise, but genuine laughter that made her eyes crinkle and her shoulders shake. He found himself smiling back, something warm unfurling in his chest. "I am terrible at this," he admitted. "You are learning. That is different." They cooked the dumplings in boiling water, ate them with their fingers because they had no proper bowls. They were not good, the dough too thick, the filling under-seasoned. But May ate hers with tears streaming down her face, and Tobias understood that some meals were not about the food. "Xiaolong always ate too many," she said. "Mother would scold him, tell him to save some for morning. He never listened. Tell me about him?" So she did. Told stories about her brother while they ate, about how he used to catch frogs and hide them in the camp supervisor's boots, about how he taught himself to juggle with river stones, about how he would sing opera badly and loudly just to make May smile when she was sad. He sounds like he was trouble. He was the best kind of trouble. Tobias pushed his handkerchief across the table. May took it, wiped her eyes, and when she tried to give it back, he shook his head. "Keep it. I have more." That night the cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a home, but peace on the frontier never lasted long. 2 days later, Tobias had to ride to a neighboring homestead to trade for salt. He told May he would be gone most of the day, told her to keep the rifle loaded and the door barred. She nodded, watched him ride away into the gray morning. She spent the day cleaning, mending, trying to keep busy, but her mind kept circling back to the map, to Broken Ridge, to the jade vein that had cost her everything. As twilight fell, she made a decision. She would scout the route, not go all the way, just far enough to see if the trail was passable, if Tobias's warnings about unstable ground were exaggerated or real. She bundled up, took the rifle, and headed north. She made it 2 miles before she realized she was being followed. The tracks were fresh in the snow, boot prints too large to be hers, pressed deep and purposeful. Someone had been watching the cabin, watching her. May's heart hammered. She turned back, moving fast, no longer caring about stealth. Behind her, she heard branches cracking, heard the crunch of snow under heavy feet. She ran. She burst into the clearing just as full dark fell. The cabin was there, smoke rising from the chimney, Tobias's horse tied outside. He was back. She was safe. But when she threw open the door, it was not just Tobias inside. James Wade sat at the table, a cup of coffee in his hands, his coat dusted with snow. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was cold. "There you are," he said pleasantly. "We were just talking about you." Tobias was standing by the fireplace, his rifle leaning against the wall just out of reach. His face was carved from stone. "Wade invited himself to dinner," Tobias said flatly. "Frontier hospitality. Could not refuse." Mai understood immediately. Wade had arrived while Tobias was returning, had used the excuse of old friendship to get inside. And now they were trapped in a careful dance where one wrong move would end in gunfire. She set the rifle by the door and moved to the table, her movements calm despite the panic clawing at her throat. "I did not know we were expecting company," Wade laughed. "Oh, I am not company, sweetheart. I am family, old partners, old—" "Tobias and I go back years, don't we?" "Ancient history," Tobias said. Wade took a long sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving May. "You know it is funny. I have been asking around Silver Creek, asking about you, about how Tobias here suddenly got himself a wife, right? when Ma Feng's people were tearing the town apart looking for a runaway Chinese girl. What is your point, Wade? My point is, coincidence makes me nervous, makes me think there is more to this arrangement than a simple marriage. Makes me think maybe you are hiding something valuable. The map, folded small, was hidden inside May's shirt. She felt it there, a weight against her ribs, a secret that could get them both killed. We are hiding nothing, May said. Just two people trying to survive the winter. Wade set down his cup. Then you will not mind if I look around. Tobias moved then, casual but deliberate, placing himself between Wade and May. You are welcome to look. But you will find nothing except a poor man's cabin and a woman who wants to be left alone. Wade stood. He was smiling, but there was nothing friendly in it. Maybe. But I think I will check anyway, starting with what she is wearing. He reached for May. Tobias's hand shot out, caught Wade's wrist. The two men stood frozen, old partners, old friends now, on opposite sides of a line neither could cross. Touch her, Tobias said quietly, and you leave here in pieces. Wade jerked his hand free. His other hand moved toward his gun belt. May grabbed the rifle by the door. The three of them stood in a triangle of potential violence, the cabin suddenly too small, the air too thick to breathe. Then Wade laughed. A genuine sound this time, surprised and bitter. You really have gone soft, Crane. Time was you would have sold your own mother for the right price. Now you are ready to die for a girl you have known 2 weeks. People change. Yeah, Wade shook his head. They do. Usually for the worse. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the latch. I will give you one more chance, Tobias, for old times. Turn her over. Keep half the bounty. We can both walk away from this rich. And if I refuse, then I come back in the spring. And I do not come alone. Wade left. The sound of his horse faded into the darkness. May and Tobias stood in the cabin, neither moving, both understanding that the clock had started ticking. Finally, Tobias spoke. How much does Ma Feng actually know everything? He knows I have the map. He knows where I am. Wade just confirmed it for him. Then, we do not have until spring. We have weeks, maybe less. May pulled the map from her shirt, laid it on the table. What do we do? Tobias stared at the map, then at her, then at the locked room. He walked to it, took out a key May had never seen, and opened the door. Inside was a shrine to a dead woman. Sarah's dresses hung on pegs, her books lined a shelf. Her hairbrush sat on a small table still tangled with strands of blonde hair. And on the wall, a letter in a frame. The letter Tobias had burned. Except he had not burned it. He had locked it away. May started to back out, but Tobias stopped her. Read it. I should not. Read it, please. May stepped forward, looked at the letter. The handwriting was delicate, educated, shaking toward the end. My dearest Tobias, it began. I cannot do this anymore. I lost the baby, our child. I lost him while you were gone, bleeding and alone, and when I called for you, you were not there. You were hunting a man for money while our son died inside me. I know you are doing this for us, but there is no us anymore. There is only me and this emptiness, and I cannot live with it. Forgive me. Sarah. May read it twice. Then she turned to Tobias. He was sitting on the edge of Sarah's bed, his face in his hands. You did not know, May said softly. I did not let myself know. Burned the letter before I could read it, locked this room and pretended it never happened. How did you finally read it? He looked up. Last week. After you told me about your brother, I realized I had been running from the truth the same way you were. So I unlocked the door, and I found out that my wife did not kill herself because I was a bounty hunter. She killed herself because I was not there when she needed me most. May sat next to him. You could not have known. I should have. Should have been here instead of chasing money. Should have chosen her over pride. They sat in silence. Then May said, My brother died because I did not burn the map when I should have. You carry guilt for what you did not do. I carry guilt for what I did. We are the same Tobias Crane. We are both haunted. He looked at her. In the dim light, her face was half shadow, half firelight. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with survival, with strength earned through suffering. I do not want to fail you the way I failed her. Then do not leave me behind when I need you. The words hung between them, a promise, a warning, a hope. Tobias reached out, touched her face with careful fingers. May did not pull away. "If we go to Broken Ridge," he said, "we go together. No secrets, no running ahead. Together. And when this is over, when Ma Feng is dealt with and the map is settled, you are free to leave. The deal was one winter. I keep my word." May covered his hand with hers. "And if I do not want to leave, then we will deal with that when spring comes." They left Sarah's room together. Tobias locked the door again, but this time it felt different. Not like hiding, like closure. Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere in the darkness, Wade was riding back to Silver Creek, back to Ma Feng, back to report that Tobias Crane had chosen the girl over the bounty. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the jade vein waited glittering and deadly, a promise of fortune that had already claimed too many lives. The next morning, they began to plan. "We cannot beat Ma Feng with force," Tobias said. "He has 20 men. We have 2 rifles and surprise. So what do? We go to Broken Ridge. We find the jade vein. We document it, take samples, do everything legal and proper. Then we file a claim using your father's original documents, make it official, make it public, and Ma Feng. Once the claim is filed, he has no legal right. He either accepts it or he fights it in court. He will not go to court. He will come for us." Tobias smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I am counting on it." They packed light. Food for a week, ammunition, the map. Chen Wei's original claim documents, which May had hidden in the lining of her coat. They would head to Broken Ridge, find the vein, return to Helena to file the claim. The journey would take 4 days in good weather. The weather was not good. They left at dawn, the sky the color of old bruises, the wind promising snow. Tobias rode his black stallion. May rode behind him, her arms around his waist, the rifle slung across her back. They climbed. The trail was treacherous ice, hidden under fresh snow, the path so narrow in places that the horse had to pick its way with agonizing care. They passed through forests of pine and aspen, the trees heavy with snow, branches hanging low like claws waiting to snag the unwary. At night they made camp under rock overhangs, shared the warmth of a single fire, ate jerky and hard biscuit, and said little. But the silence was companionable now. The silence of people who had learned to trust each other. On the 3rd day they reached Broken Ridge. It was exactly as brutal as Tobias had described, a massive cliff face split by geological violence with exposed rock striations that showed the bones of the earth. At the base, half hidden by scrub pine, was an old mining camp, abandoned, frozen, dead. But when they approached, they found it was not entirely abandoned. There was a cabin, small, rough, barely standing. And inside they found remains, human remains. Tobias knelt beside the skeleton, examined the scraps of clothing. This man has been dead 5, maybe 6 years. May moved to the table. There were papers there, protected from the elements by the cabin's roof. She picked them up with shaking hands. "Tobias, look." He came to her side, read over her shoulder. They were claim documents, legal papers, filed in 1876 in the name of Chen Wei, and beneath them a journal. Tobias opened it. The handwriting was Chinese, but there were dates in English numbers, technical notes he could puzzle out. He handed it to May. "Can you read it?" She could. And what she read made her sink to the floor, the journal clutched to her chest. "My father filed the claim before he died. This cabin was his. He was documenting the jade vein, making it legal, doing everything right. And Ma Feng killed him for it. Killed him and stole the claim and made everyone think it had never existed." Tobias picked up the claim papers. "These are legal, properly filed. That means Ma Feng has been operating illegally for 6 years. Can we use this? We do not just use it. This is everything. This proves your father owned the land, proves Ma Feng is a thief and a murderer." May walked to the door, looked out at the mountain where her father had died. "He was protecting us. If Ma Feng knew we had this, he would have killed us all. But now we have it. And we can finish what your father started." They stayed in the cabin that night. It felt wrong sleeping in the place where her father had spent his final days, but it also felt like coming home, like completing a circle. May sat with the journal until late, reading her father's words by firelight. Tobias sat nearby, whittling, giving her space to grieve. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. He wrote about us, about how he was going to buy land in California, build a house, send Xiaolong to university, give me a dowry so I could marry well. Tobias set down his knife. He was a good man. He was. And Ma Feng took that from him. From all of us. We will make it right. May looked at him. How? By making sure everyone knows the truth. By taking this to the law. By making Ma Feng face justice. The law does not care about Chinese miners. The law cares about property theft, about fraud, about documented claims filed legally and stolen by force. We make this about the law, not about race. We make it undeniable. May wanted to believe him, but she had learned that the frontier had its own justice and it rarely favored people who looked like her. Still, she had come this far. Might as well see it through. They left at first light, the documents carefully wrapped, the journal tucked inside May's coat next to the map. They would ride to Helena, file an amended claim, bring in the authorities, but they never made it. They were 2 hours from the cabin when Wade found them. He came from the north, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat, despite the cold. He was alone, and he had a gun in his hand. Tobias pulled his horse to a stop. May felt his body tense. Wade, Tobias said calmly, "Did not expect to see you this soon." Wade looked terrible. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, blood crusted his collar. He swayed in the saddle. "They know," he said. His voice was raw. "Ma Feng knows about the claim. Knows you are going to Helena. He has men on every road." How does he know? Wade looked away. "Because I told him." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Tobias's hand moved toward his rifle. "Wait," Wade said quickly. "Just wait. Let me explain. Explain why you sold us out." Wade slid from his horse, stumbled. Tobias could see now that his hands were shaking, that he could barely stand. "Ma Feng took me 3 days ago, tortured me, wanted to know everything. I held out as long as I could, Tobias. I swear I did. But he broke me, so you gave him what he wanted. I gave him some of it, told him about the cabin, about the girl, but I did not tell him about the claim documents, did not tell him about your father's papers." He looked at May. His good eye was desperate. "I came to warn you. Ma Feng is sending 20 men to Broken Ridge. They will burn everything, destroy any evidence. And if they catch you with those documents, they will kill you both." "Why should we believe you?" May asked. Wade reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, handed it to Tobias. "Because I brought you this." Tobias unfolded it. It was a legal document, a statement signed by Wade, confessing that Ma Feng had hired him to kill Chen Wei 6 years ago, that the mine collapse had been sabotage, that Ma Feng had stolen the jade vein claim through fraud and murder. Wade had signed it, witnessed and dated. "This is a death warrant," Tobias said quietly. "For you." "I know." Wade sat heavily in the snow. "But I am tired, Tobias. Tired of being the man I have become. You got out. After Sarah died, you walked away from bounty hunting, tried to be better. I just kept sinking. So this is redemption. This is me trying to sleep at night." Wade coughed spit blood. "Ma Feng already thinks I am dead, told his men to dump my body in the creek. But I got loose, took a horse, came to find you. What do you want from us?" "Nothing. Just give that statement to the law. Make sure Ma Feng pays. And then forget I existed." Wade struggled to his feet, swayed toward his horse. "Where will you go?" May asked. "California, maybe. Somewhere warm, somewhere I can die without freezing." He mounted with difficulty, looked at Tobias one last time. "I am sorry for all of it." Then he rode away south toward low country and whatever future he had left. Tobias and May sat in the snow, the confession in Tobias's hands, the weight of it enormous. "Do we trust him?" May asked. Tobias read the confession again. The details were specific. Dates, names, methods. This was not a vague accusation. This was testimony. Wade is a lot of things, but he was never a liar. If he says Ma Feng is coming, Ma Feng is coming. Then what do? We do not go to Helena, not yet. We go back to the cabin, fortify, prepare. And when Ma Feng's men come, we are ready. Ready to fight 20 men, ready to survive. And if we survive, then we make sure these documents reach the law. They turned their horses toward home. But when they arrived at the cabin 3 hours later, home was gone. The structure still stood, but the door hung open. Inside, everything was destroyed, furniture overturned, food stores scattered. Their clothes ripped apart, the stuffing pulled from mattresses, every hidden place violated. And on the table, carved deep into the wood, was a message: "Return what you stole, or everyone dies." May stood in the wreckage of the place that had become her sanctuary, felt rage rising in her throat, hot and bitter. Tobias moved through the destruction, his face unreadable. He checked the locked room. It had been broken into, Sarah's things scattered and trampled. Something inside him went very still. "They were looking for the documents," he said quietly. "Did not find them because you had them with you." May touched the papers hidden in her coat. "What now?" "Now we make a choice. We can run. Take these documents to Helena, file the claim, let the law handle it, play it safe. Or we finish this ourselves." Tobias looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had not seen before, a cold fury, a decision made. "We give Ma Feng exactly what he wants, and we make it poison." May understood immediately. "You want to bait him. I want to end this, once and for all. No more running, no more hiding. We control when and where the fight happens, and we make sure that when it is over, the truth cannot be buried." How Tobias picked up the carved message, ran his finger over the words. "We send word to Ma Feng. Tell him we will trade the map and the documents for safe passage. We set the meeting at Broken Ridge, and when he arrives, we make sure he does not leave." May looked at the destroyed cabin, at the violated sanctuary, at the life they had been building, torn apart by greed and violence. She thought of her father, her brother, all the people crushed under Ma Feng's ambition. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow. We have preparing to do." That night they slept in the ruined cabin back to back, for warmth, weapons within reach. Neither slept well, but when dawn came they rose together, packed what remained, and began the final preparation. The winter was ending, the thaw was coming, and with it a reckoning 6 years overdue. The map lay spread across the table one last time. Tobias had weighted the corners with stones from the creek, the same stones that had witnessed the deaths of May's father and brother, the same stones that had absorbed blood and secrets and the slow erosion of time. "We cannot beat him with force," Tobias said. His finger traced the route from their cabin to Broken Ridge and back. "Ma Feng has 20 men. We have 2 rifles and the element of surprise." "Surprise is not enough," May said. "No, but the law might be." She looked at him across the firelight. They had spent the night cleaning what remained of the cabin, salvaging what they could from the wreckage. Her hands were raw from scrubbing blood off the floor, blood Ma Feng's men had left as another message. Animal blood, she hoped. But in this territory, you could never be certain. The law does not care about people like me. Tobias picked up Chen Wei's journal, held it to the light. "The law cares about property, about documented claims filed properly and stolen through fraud. Your father did everything right. He filed in 1876 legal and witnessed. Ma Feng has been operating on stolen land for 6 years. And you think a judge will care? I think a judge will care about a white witness willing to testify to murder." May's breath caught. "You would do that?" Tobias set down the journal, met her eyes. "Wade gave us his confession. We have your father's claim. We have proof. All we need is a U.S. Marshal willing to listen. And I know one in Helena, Thomas Garrett. He is not a good man, but he is a thorough man. Give him evidence he can use, and he will use it. What if he refuses? Then we burn everything, the map, the claim, all of it. Make sure Ma Feng can never profit from what he stole." May thought of her father's careful handwriting in the journal, thought of Xiaolong's sacrifice, thought of 6 years of lies and blood. "When do we leave tomorrow? Before Ma Feng realizes we are not running scared." They packed by candlelight, food for 5 days, ammunition for the rifles. The documents wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a leather satchel Tobias had buried beneath the cabin's floorboards, a hiding place even Ma Feng's men had missed. They worked in silence, 2 people who had learned to communicate without words, who could read each other's tension in the set of shoulders, the tightness around eyes. At midnight, May went to the locked room. The door hung broken on its hinges now, Sarah's sanctuary violated. May stood in the threshold looking at the scattered books, the trampled dresses. Ma Feng's men had destroyed this place looking for hiding spots, caring nothing for the ghost who had lived here. Tobias came up behind her. "We should board it up. Keep the cold out." "No," May said quietly. "We should clean it." She turned to face him. "Your wife deserves better than this, deserves to rest without her memory being defiled. It is just a room. It is more than that. You know it is." They cleaned Sarah's room together, picked up the books, folded the dresses with care, swept the floor until it shone in the lamplight. They found the hairbrush still tangled with blonde strands, and May cleaned it gently, set it on the small table. They straightened the bed, smoothed the quilt. And when it was done, the room looked almost as it must have when Sarah was alive. Almost peaceful. Tobias stood in the center, turning slowly. "Thank you," he said. "She was part of your life. That matters." He looked at May. "And what are you?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. "I am someone who is still here," May said finally. "Someone who is choosing to stay. Even when spring comes, even then, if you will have me." Tobias crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms. She felt the tremble in his hands, the way he buried his face in her hair, breathing her in like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. "I do not deserve you. None of us deserve anything. We just choose what we keep." They stood like that for a long moment. Then Tobias stepped back, framed her face with his hands. "When this is over," he said, "when Ma Feng is dealt with and we are safe, I am going to ask you properly. Going to do this right. Ask me what you know what." May smiled. It was a small expression, fragile as early spring ice, but real. "Then I will wait." They left at dawn. The journey to Helena took 2 days in good weather. They had one. The second day, a storm rolled in from the north, turning the world white and erasing the trail ahead. They pushed through Tobias, navigating by instinct and memory, May clinging to his back as the wind tried to tear her from the saddle. By the time they reached Helena, both were half frozen, their faces raw with windburn ice crusted in their hair and beards. The town was bigger than Silver Creek, almost civilized. 2 streets of real buildings, a church with a steeple, a courthouse that doubled as a land office. People moved through the snow with purpose, too busy surviving to stare at a white man and a Chinese woman riding together. Tobias brought them to a boarding house, paid for a room and a hot bath. While May thawed by the fire, he went to find Marshal Thomas Garrett. He found him in the saloon playing cards with 3 miners who were losing badly. Garrett was 50 years old, weathered like old leather, with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He looked up when Tobias approached, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. And wariness. "Tobias Crane, thought you were dead. Not yet. Should have known better. Men like you do not die easy." Garrett set down his cards, gestured to an empty chair. "What brings you to civilization?" "A claim dispute. Need the law's help." Garrett laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "The law does not reach past Silver Creek, and you know it. This is different." Tobias pulled out Wade's confession, set it on the table. Murder, fraud, theft of a legal mining claim, all documented. Garrett read the confession slowly. His expression did not change, but Tobias saw his jaw tighten. When he finished, he looked up. "Wade signed this 3 days ago. Wade is dead. Ma Feng's men found his body in the creek yesterday." Tobias felt the floor drop out from under him. "You are certain the corpse was half frozen, but it had Wade's coat, his boots, his gun. The sheriff identified him. But the face was too damaged to be sure. Could have been staged. Someone wanted it to look like Wade. Or Wade is actually dead, and this confession is his last act. Either way, Ma Feng might be using Wade's gear to make us think he is gone. If I were Ma Feng, I would keep Wade alive as bait." Garrett tapped the paper. "Either way, this is explosive. You have proof to back it up. Chen Wei's original claim, filed legally in 1876, and his journal documenting the jade vein. And you want me to do what exactly? Arrest Ma Feng, seize his operation, restore the claim to Chen Wei's heir." Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You are asking me to go after the Ma family. They own half the labor camps between here and the border. They have money connections and enough men to start a small war. They also murdered a legal claim holder and stole his land. That is your jurisdiction, only if I can prove it, and only if I live long enough to make the arrest. Tobias leaned forward. I will give you everything. Documents, testimony, and I will stand witness in court. A white witness, Garrett. That matters, and you know it. Garrett studied him. Why do you care? What is this Chinese girl to you? She is the reason I am not dead inside. The marshal considered this. Then he folded Wade's confession, tucked it into his coat. I will ride to Broken Ridge. I will examine the claim site. If everything checks out, I will file the paperwork to freeze Ma Feng's operation pending investigation. But Crane, if this is a setup, if you are playing me, I will arrest you both and let you rot in a territorial prison. Fair enough. Garrett stood. We leave tomorrow. Be ready. Tobias returned to the boarding house. Mai was sitting by the fire wearing clean clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered. How did it go? He is coming. But Wade is dead. Mai closed her eyes. How Ma Feng probably, making sure there are no witnesses. But he left the confession, a last act of conscience, or revenge. Tobias sat beside her. Either way, we have what we need. They spent the night in a real bed for the first time in months, lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, both too aware of the precipice they stood on. Tomorrow they would ride back to Broken Ridge, would confront everything, would either win their freedom or lose their lives. Mai turned to face him. If something happens to me, nothing will happen, but if it does. She took his hand. I want you to know that these months, this winter, it was the freest I have ever been. Even scared, even running. I was free because I chose to be here. Tobias brought her hand to his lips. Nothing is going to happen. We are going to survive this. And when it is over, we are going to build something that lasts. Promise me. I promise. Outside the wind howled. Inside, two people held on to each other and pretended the world was not waiting to tear them apart. They rode out at first light, Garrett and two deputies accompanying them. The journey back took 3 days, the storm having made the trails nearly impassable. They did not speak much. Garrett was not a man for conversation, and his deputies were young, nervous, clearly wondering what they had gotten themselves into. On the 3rd day, as they crested the final ridge overlooking Broken Ridge, Garrett pulled up short. Smoke. Tobias followed his gaze. Black smoke rose from the valley below, thick and oily. Someone was burning something. Burning it now. They spurred their horses forward. The scene at Broken Ridge was chaos. Ma Feng had not waited for them to arrive. He had come early with 15 men, and they were systematically destroying the mining camp. The old cabin where Chen Wei had lived was engulfed in flames. Men with picks and shovels were collapsing the mine entrances, burying any evidence of the jade vein. And in the center of it all, tied to a post, was a man. Tobias's heart stopped. It was Wade, or what was left of him. His face was a mask of bruises, blood crusted black on his shirt. But he was alive. Barely. Garrett swore. I thought he was dead. So did Ma Feng, apparently. They dismounted, took cover behind a rock outcropping. Garrett pulled out his spyglass, scanned the camp. I count 15, maybe more in the mine. Ma Feng is the small one, by the fire. Tobias found him. Ma Feng stood with his back to the flames, watching his men work with the calm satisfaction of a man who believed he had won. He was thin, sharp-featured, dressed too well for a mining camp. A predator in gentleman's clothing. We need a plan, Garrett said. I have one. Tobias checked his rifle. You stay here with your deputies. When the shooting starts, you come in and arrest whoever is left standing. That is suicide. Probably. But I am not leaving Wade to die. Before Garrett could stop him, Tobias stood and walked into the open. Mai, who had been silent until now, grabbed her rifle and followed. The moment they appeared, Ma Feng's men went for their guns, but Ma Feng raised his hand, stopped them. Hold. I want to hear what the dead man has to say. Tobias walked forward until he was 20 feet from Ma Feng, close enough to see the coldness in the man's eyes, close enough to smell the burning wood, and underneath it the copper scent of blood. Let him go, Tobias said, gesturing to Wade. Ma Feng smiled. Number 1, I do not think I will. You see, this dog told me something very interesting before I had him beaten. He told me you would come, that you could not resist trying to save him. I am here. Now, let him go. First you give me what you stole, the map, the claim documents, everything. And if I refuse, Ma Feng drew a pistol, pressed it to Wade's head. Then I kill him. And then I kill the girl. And then I kill you. And I burn every piece of paper that says, I do not own this mountain. Tobias looked at Wade. The man's eyes were open lucid despite the beating. And in them, Tobias saw something unexpected. Acceptance, peace, almost. Wade managed to smile through broken teeth. Do not do it, Crane. Let me go. Ma Feng's face hardened. Touching, but meaningless. You have 10 seconds to decide. Wait. May stepped forward. She pulled the oilcloth package from her coat, held it up. You want these? You can have them. Tobias turned to her. May, no. She ignored him. Walked toward Ma Feng, the documents in her outstretched hand. Ma Feng's eyes gleamed. Smart girl. Your father should have been so wise. That was when May struck the match. She had palmed it while pulling out the documents, struck it against the rough oilcloth. The flame caught small and bright in the gray afternoon. Ma Feng's expression changed. What are you doing? My father spent his life searching for this vein. My brother died protecting these papers. And you think I will give them to you, let you profit from their murders? She dropped the burning match onto the documents. The oilcloth caught. The papers inside began to smolder. Ma Feng lunged forward. His men rushed toward May. Tobias fired. The first shot took the man closest to May, dropped him in the snow. The second shot shattered the post, holding Wade, splintering the wood. Wade, half dead but still fighting, threw himself sideways as the shooting began. Garrett and his deputies came over the ridge, firing shouting orders. And May, in the chaos, ran. She ran toward the mine entrance, the burning documents clutched to her chest. Ma Feng followed, screaming his pistol, firing wildly. She dodged into the tunnel, into darkness. Tobias was 3 steps behind. Inside the mine, the air was thick with dust and the smell of explosives. The support beams were half collapsed, the floor littered with broken tools and rubble. Ma Feng's men had been working to bury the vein, and they had done their work well. The whole structure was unstable, ready to come down with the slightest provocation. May stood in the center of the main shaft, the documents still burning in her hands. Ma Feng faced her, his gun leveled at her heart. Give them to me, he hissed. Give them to me, and I will let you live. You killed my father. He was weak. You killed my brother. He was a thief. May smiled. It was a terrible expression, full of grief and rage and a kind of awful joy. And I am their vengeance. She threw the burning documents at Ma Feng's feet. Then she pulled a torch from the wall and hurled it into a side tunnel where Ma Feng's men had been storing black powder for the demolition work. The explosion was instantaneous. Tobias grabbed May, threw her to the ground, covered her body with his as the world came apart. Fire roared through the tunnels. Support beams snapped like kindling. The ceiling collapsed in a wave of rock and earth and ancient timber. When the dust settled, half the mountain had come down. Tobias dragged May out of the rubble. They emerged into daylight, coughing, bleeding, covered in dirt. Behind them, the mine entrance was completely buried. Tons of rock sealed the jade vein forever. Ma Feng and 3 of his men were trapped inside. The remaining men dropped their weapons, raised their hands. Garrett's deputies moved in, started making arrests. Wade was lying in the snow, laughing despite the pain. He looked at Tobias. You always did know how to make an exit, Crane. Tobias knelt beside him. Hold on. We will get you to a doctor. Wade shook his head. Too late for that. But I got to see Ma Feng buried. That is enough. You saved us, the confession, the warning. You saved us, had to. You were the only friend I ever had. Wade's eyes found May. Take care of her, Tobias. She is tougher than both of us. I will. Wade closed his eyes. For a moment, Tobias thought he was gone. But then Wade spoke one more time, his voice barely a whisper. Tell Sarah I am sorry for what I said about her. She was too good for you, but she loved you anyway. Then he was gone. Tobias sat back in the snow, felt the weight of all the years, all the violence, all the choices that had led to this moment. Felt May's hand on his shoulder, grounding him, pulling him back from the edge. We need to go, she said softly. He nodded, stood, let Garrett handle the arrests and the paperwork. They rode back to the cabin in silence. The structure was still standing, still damaged but repairable. They walked inside, stood in the ruins of their temporary home. The deal was one winter, Tobias said. Winter is over. Spring is here. May looked at him. I know. So you are free. You can go to San Francisco, to Denver, anywhere you want. I could, but I do not want to leave. She moved to him, placed her hand over his heart. You said when this was over, you would ask me something properly. So ask. Tobias reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object. It was a ring, silver simple, bought with the last of his savings in Helena. He had planned a speech, had practiced words. But looking at her, words felt insufficient. Mei Jiang, will you stay? Will you build a life here with me? Not because you owe me, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose this. Choose me. Tears streamed down May's face. Yes, yes, I choose you. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They stood together in the damaged cabin, two people who had lost everything and found each other. Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing away the last of the winter snow. In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt. The cabin was repaired, made stronger than before. Sarah's room was cleaned, completely transformed into a library where Tobias practiced his reading and May kept her father's journal. They did not erase Sarah. They simply made space for her memory alongside their future. Garrett came to visit once, told them Ma Feng's body had been recovered from the mine along with 3 of his men. The Ma family operation was finished, the camps disbanded, the workers freed. Chen Wei's original claim had been filed officially, and since the vein itself was inaccessible, the land would revert to the territory. What about us? May asked. Garrett had smiled. As far as I am concerned, you are just a rancher and his wife trying to make a living. The documents were destroyed in a mining accident. Wade's confession stood, but with the principals dead, the case is closed. He tipped his hat and rode away. 6 months later, on a warm August afternoon, a young boy appeared at the cabin. He was maybe 10 years old, dirty and scared, speaking only Chinese. His parents had died in a camp collapse. He had nowhere to go. May took him in without hesitation. She taught him English, taught him to read, taught him that he was worth more than what others said. Tobias taught him to hunt, to track, to survive. They named him Chen, after May's father. More children followed over the years, not their own, but others who needed shelter. Chinese laborers, orphans, mixed-race children abandoned by both cultures. By the time a decade had passed, the cabin had grown into a ranch, and the ranch had grown into a community. People called it Thorn Ranch after the way May and Tobias had survived, despite everything trying to kill them. One winter evening, 20 years after that first desperate transaction in Silver Creek, May stood on the porch watching snow fall. She was 45 now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands calloused from years of work. But she was alive, and she was home. Tobias came out, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. His beard was fully gray now, his face lined, but his eyes were still that same glacial blue. Cold, he asked. No, May smiled, leaning into his warmth. I am home. Inside the cabin, children's laughter echoed. Chen was reading to the younger ones, his voice strong and clear. On the shelf sat 2 journals, Chen Wei's documenting the discovery of the jade vein, and Xiao Long's filled with the dreams of a boy who had died too young. The Ma family was forgotten, the jade vein remained buried. But the people who had paid the price for other men's greed lived on in memory, honored by those who survived. May had been sold as a burden, discarded like worthless goods. But in the arms of a broken man on a frozen mountain, the so-called worthless girl had found a kingdom, had built a legacy, had chosen love over revenge, life over death, future over past. The snow fell soft and steady, covering the scars the land carried, making everything clean and new. And on the porch of Thorn Ranch, 2 people who had been lost found warmth in each other and called it home. Some treasures are worth more than gold. Some debts can only be paid with living well, and some winters, no matter how brutal, eventually give way to spring.